Dear students, welcome again to the Introduction to Journalism and Media Studies department. And my name is Libe Chonya from the Open University of Tanzania. And I'm taking you through Knowledge Area 4. And the subject is Introduction to Journalism and Mass Communication. Now, I'm taking you through understanding the elements of communication process and mass communication functions. That is Knowledge Area 4. What are the elements of the communication process? We can identify about 7 elements that are involved in the communication process. These are stimulus, and we have to define what stimulus is. We are saying stimulus as one of the elements of the communication process. This is the impulse or the urge that triggers off the communication exchange. It takes place at the ideation stage of the communication. Stimulus, which means now the impulse, the urge. If we have the sender of the message, we are saying he or she has the urge to initiate the communication process. He or she may trigger off the communication exchange. So it takes place at the ideation stage. Somebody is having an idea to communicate. That is stimulus as one of the elements. So we can also call it the reason one has for communicating, which may be to inform. Another reason could be to educate, and another reason could be to entertain. That is stimulus. Somebody is having an idea. That's an ideation stage. Stimulus, somebody has an urge to communicate, to initiate the communication process. And then we have the source. This is a person who begins the communication process. He is the one triggered by the stimulus, and from him begins the communication activity. And he's the one who encodes the message before it's being transmitted to the receiver. He could be referred to the initiator, the one who is initiating the message. Encoder or the sender of the message. He is the initiator because he begins the communication process itself. As the encoder of the message, he packages the message in a way that it can be communicated, and as the sender, when he passes across the message by himself. And then we have the message. This could be the idea, the feelings, the information, thoughts, opinion, knowledge or experience, etc., etc. And that is the source or the sender wants to share. So what's the message all about? You have a certain thought, for example. You have an opinion that you want to communicate to people. So that's the message. You are trying to craft the message to the audience so that they understand what you want to communicate to them. And then we have the channel. This is the pathway, the route or conduit through which the message now travels between the source and the receiver. For example, we are talking of radios, television, newspapers, telephones, etc. So that's a channel of communication. So, in other words, we're saying a channel now provides a link that enables the source and the receivers to communicate. It may also be seen in terms of 5 physical senses. And we're talking of a sight. We all know these physical senses. We talk of a sound, touch, smell, taste, etc., where the message will be sent, received and understood, interpreted and acted upon. And then we have the receiver of the message. This is the person whom the message is being sent. So he is the target of the message. And in other words, he or she is the recipient of that message. So all the source, the sender's effort to communicate or is to inform or affect the attitude of the receiver. That's why communication must be receiver-centered. So the one who's going to communicate, that is the sender of the message, must make sure that whatever he or she is going to communicate has an impact to the society. It must bring a certain effect and a positive effect on that matter. And communication, we're saying, it must be receivers-centered. It must bring an impact. We have feedback. This is the response or reaction of the receiver to the message that has been sent. Communication is incomplete without feedback. We all understand that. And it confirms that the message is well received and understood. How are you going to react to the message that has been sent to you by the sender? If you react to that message, if you get the message, if you react to that message, and then we are saying the feedback is well understood and acted upon. Feedback now guides the source in communication process and helps him to know when to alter or modify his message if it's not properly received. I remember in one of the settings I was teaching audience research to my students. And I say, once you're preparing a radio broadcasting program, for example, and it goes on air, you must ensure that you do some kind of an audience research to find out how that program has been received by the audience. Is there any impact to the program that you've aired? Have people changed their attitude, their way of thinking, as a result of airing your program? Are people bringing in phone calls as a result of the program that is being aired? That's the feedback. So it guides the one who is going to air the program to know where he has gone wrong, to modify the program, or to add some other components, to omit some unnecessary materials or components, or to omit some unnecessary issues that could not be well understood to the audience out there. That is the importance of having feedback in your program. So feedback is now positive when it shows that the message has been well received and understood, and it could be negative when it shows that the intended effect has not been achieved. Imagine that you're airing a certain program on a particular setting. Maybe you want to sensitize people on HIV/AIDS. After you've aired the program several times, you find that people have never, or people are not changing their attitudes. What does that imply? Dear students, it implies that the program that you've aired has got no impact to that particular community. But if you air the same program, similar program, and people start taking action, then it means your program has bear a positive effect. Then we have noise. What is noise? Saying noise is interference. that keeps a message from being understood or accurately interpreted. It is a potent barrier to effective communication. So whenever you're crafting a message, and then there is a kind of interference that's being referred to as noise. And we have several kinds of noise. For example, we have the physical noise. This comes from the environment and keeps the message from being heard or understood. You may be airing a program in an environment that people are speaking so loud, or there is a side talk somewhere, people talking, or there is a meeting, people shouting. There are vehicles passing through, music sounds, etc., etc. That's a physical noise that could create a barrier to effective communication. But we have also psychological noise, and this comes from within as a result of poor mental attitude, depression, emotional stress, or disability. Communication is not going to take place in an effective manner. If we have stress, if you have a mental disorder, for example, you have depression, etc. So that is being referred to as psychological noise. But we also have physiological noise. That is the result from the interference from the body in a form of discomforts, feelings of hunger, for example, tiredness, boredom, etc. So physiological noise, find somebody is very tired, can't even read the newspaper. Somebody, is feeling hungry, tired, etc. That is physiological noise, and it could create a barrier to effective communication. We also have linguistic noise. This is from the source inability to use the language of communication accurately and appropriately. Be a grammatical noise manifested in the form of defects in the use, rules of grammar of language, and faulty sentence structures, etc. So we're saying linguistic noise could be, we have a very difficult, vocabularies that have been used in your content, a lot of grammatical errors, etc. That's linguistic noise. And it may be semantic, as in the wrong use of words, or use of unfamiliar words that are very difficult for the audience to understand, misspellings, etc. And it could also be phonological manifested in incorrect pronunciation. After having looked at that, dear students, now let us look at the functions now of mass communication. What are the functions of mass communication? We have several functions of mass communication, but here we're going to discuss the key functions of mass communication. As a part of introduction, we are saying that the function of mass communication in the society is enormous. This is evident in the different appellations or names that the journalists are called. For example, we have the names like the watchdog, intellectual, the fourth estate of realm, and so on and so forth. That's a function of mass communication. So the press, we are saying the press itself, it helps to sanitize the society, to cleanse the society of all the forms of corruption by scrutinizing the actions, the policies, and performance of those who are in the top authority. That's one function of the press. They're going to scrutinize those in power. What are they doing up there? Are they being socially responsible to the citizens whom they're serving? So find that the press in its watchdog function is the vital communication link between these concerned citizens who wants to assess how those who are running things are doing on top there, and the evidence that can indicate the quality of their performance. So he's saying the journalists in this matter have to ensure they perform the watchdog function. They have to monitor what these, people at the top are doing in saving their citizens. Are they being corrupt? Are they being responsible to the citizens? Etc. That's the watchdog's function. And that's a very common function of the mass communication. So the press now checks the potential for inefficient, irresponsible, unethical, or even illegal behavior on the part of those whom we trust as leaders. The importance of the press as the eyes and ears of the public in monitoring governmental activities has never been greater, and it's a task that sometimes is being difficult for most of the journalists to undergo. Now, let us look specifically into these functions now. One of the functions that is very common is surveillance function. We are saying this is it's not otherwise known as a news function of the mass communication, and it involves scouting the environment to bring the evidence essential for informational or news about major happenings in the society. The surveillance function. You're trying to scout, you're trying to monitor what's going on. So the word surveillance connotes a careful monitoring of something done in secret. Dear students, the idea behind surveillance is to protect things or someone under watch from falling below public expectation or going astray. So journalists have the role of doing surveillance to monitor what the leaders are doing, and if they are doing some kind of mischief, they are obliged now to report to the general public on how these leaders are misbehaving. That's a surveillance function. So the surveillance concept is synonymous to watchdog's role of the press. As a watchdog, the media monitors social ills and exposes them. And these ills now include corruption in any sector of the society. Talking of politics, a lot of corruption there. We have corruption in the education system. We even have corruption in church and mosques, organizations, etc., etc. So by exposing corruption, the journalist is sanitizing the society now, is cleansing the society, and at the same time putting the public office or public holders on public scale, which measurement is done by members of the public. A journalist is sanitizing the society, is holding those people responsible. So if they're not performing to the expectations of the general public, it is the role of the journalist now to perform their watchdogs or surveillance function. Dear students, so we're saying the watchdog's role, the journalist owes the public duty of digging out the hidden deeds and untold, or rather unheard, dealings. The dealings which are under the carpet. So the journalists have the role to unveil what is going on so that the public is able to know and to hold the leaders accountable. We also have correlation function. Now, with the correlation function of mass communication, is otherwise known as the opinion or editorial function of the press. This refers to the process of editorial selection or rather interpretation and prescription, through which the mass media now help their consumers to better understand the information brought to them. So we have the editorial selection, whereby sometimes the editorial team would be there selecting stories and try to give their editorial stance or interpretation of issues, etc., etc., so that the audience out there is able to understand in nitty-gritty, in details. So by the correlation function, the media now provide the background social context and critical analysis of events so that the general public is able to understand. So the press also helps to monitor the public opinion. They would be there to look at the public thought. What are the public thinking about a certain event that has happened? What are the opinions of the general public? For example, they may get opinions through radio, phone calls, television programs. You may get opinions from the ordinary citizens, etc. So that's a public opinion. So they have to take those public opinion, understand them, and give their critique so that the general public is able to understand. So the correlation function is best illustrated now in columns and editorial pages of newspapers, where the columnists may compare statements made by political office holders with conflicting statements, for example, made by other politicians or personal views on a certain matter. We are all witnesses in our newspapers where we have columns, we have editorial columns or pages, we have pages for opinion stemmed from the public, etc., etc. Editorial page, for example, for a newspaper, giving their own stance on a particular sensitive issue. But we also have different pages just spared in order for the general public to give their own views as with regard to a certain sensitive issue. That is the correlation function of the mass communication. It may also be observed in the broadcast commentaries, for example, and editorials in television, documentaries designed to make viewers aware of an issue, supportive of a prescribed course of action. So people are able to give their own views, opinions as with regard to a certain issue. In a broadcast, for example, in a radio, after a news bulletin, and then we have news commentaries, trying to elaborate and give details of a certain issue, and that is sensitive for that matter. But we also have entertainment function. And one of the most popular functions of mass communication is to entertain. As a matter of fact, higher percentages of audience prefers entertainment to information. Those in the category include students, we have youth, teenagers, sport lovers, kids who are in love with cartoons, etc. So you find that except for very serious-minded individuals who tune to the media for the sake of information, but quite a number of people consume media products during the leisure time, and such see media as a tool for enjoyment and entertainment. By nature, we are saying entertainment is meant to ease a tension or stress. When somebody is just from the office and they're not getting along well with their bosses, etc. So you find that when he or she gets back home, switching on the television set and watch the music, watch the film, in that way he or she is getting entertained and relieve himself or herself from the stress. So that's the key function of the mass communication, to entertain. So besides, viewers catch their fun through talk shows, we have advertisements, especially on Hollywood movies. We have live matches, television drama, etc. So the newspaper and magazines as well entertain through editorials, cartoons, etc., etc. All these are part of entertainment. Dear students, after having looked at those key functions of mass communications, I understand there could be some other, key functions of mass communication that I've not mentioned here. But these are just some of the key that, dear students, you have to understand. Dear students, after having looked at the functions of mass communication, I'm sure there could be some other functions that you know. But those that have been discussed are some of the key functions of mass communication. Now, I want you to engage in a class activity, and I want you to explain with examples to differentiate surveillance function from correlation function in mass communication process. I repeat, I'm saying with examples, differentiate surveillance function from correlation function in mass communication process. Dear students, after having said that, I hope that you've enjoyed the lesson. And till that note, I hope to see you in the next lecture. And I say goodbye and thank you for your attention.